All right. We are streaming and I'm going to hit record. All right. Happy Monday, everybody. It is November 10th, and this is the Solid Ground live stream. And I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce. I'm joined by Jennifer Friend, Christine Siefenwolk, and today we have a guest, Michael Mercier, with us to talk about technology and human flourishing. I feel like I'm trying to like not cough right now. So I have this really, I just watched that old Saturday Night Live skit about the NPR ladies. And I feel like the NPR ladies right now trying to be very calm. So I'm going to cough off my. Okay. Thank you all.
Sure.
So, Michael, you reached out recently and offered to talk about tech addiction and some of the things that you've researched. Let me pull up your info here because it's really interesting. You are the president of Screen Education, which provides research, seminars, and consulting on the impact of information technology on human optimization and well-being. And there's so much to get into on this topic. So I'm excited to speak with you today, and it's good to see all of you. Hello, David Loboy. Hello, student of rhythm. Jay Guy is nice to see you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just do a shameless self-promotion real quick. It's Jennifer. I finished your mugs. You want to see them?
You did, yeah.
Here's one. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then the other one that I made for you. It is.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Pretty pink.
Is that a dachshund on there
Yes,
too?
a dachshund and a boxer.
Oh my God.
You wanted boxers, and I gave you a dachshund and a boxer.
Oh my God.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
thinking
A bonus dachshund.
a bonus dachshund. I've made so many things since I started doing ceramics about, well, a little over a year ago. And I am about to put them on Etsy, I think. So if people are interested in that, I can give you guys that. But I don't have them up yet. Here's like just more examples of stuff I do.
Oh my gosh.
And then I make lots of these little, just cute little, not much surface design, just a mug. Anyway, if you guys are interested, let me know. I don't have a kiln, David. I have a membership at a studio. I have a wheel and my own little space here where I make things, but then I have to bring them in to have them fired. I'm not sure I'm ready to tackle learning how to do all the things that go along with a kiln yet. I'm really technologically dumb, just to put it very bluntly. I'm really bad at learning new systems. So thanks, student of rhythm. I appreciate that. And thanks, David. That's very nice. I'll do an Etsy. I'll reopen my Etsy pretty soon. I'll put the link out for you guys if anybody's interested. It might be in time for Christmas. And
awesome.
This is the Solid Ground live stream. We are a peer support and discussion group. We have been hosting groups since, I guess it's going on 3 years. It'll be 3 years in January. And thanks, David. Yeah, he says, don't say that about yourself. Yeah, thank you. That was a really rude way to say it, but I know I struggle with learning new systems. I really do. So, and tech is one of those things that I know a kiln is like super ancient, low tech, but it still intimidates me. So you can find us if you're interested in joining one of our peer support groups. There will be links in the description of this video. We are on Substack, and we also have a locals, and we'd love to have you guys be part of the discussion. So just sort of getting into it then, Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what got you interested in this issue of how humans are interfacing with technology?
Yeah, it actually, for me, it goes back to third grade. It was in third grade that I realized that television was addictive. And I had this experience. I was at a friend's house and we were watching TV, and it was like the wintertime, sitting on his floor, and I asked him a question and he didn't respond. So I turned and looked, and he was mesmerized staring at the TV. And I said, Todd, and I asked the question, whatever it was, and he didn't respond. So I had to physically shake him. And it was like he came out of a trance, you know? I mean, like he woke up out of a trance. And I actually thought, like, this can't be healthy. So this medium can't be healthy. And then the next year in fourth grade, my fourth grade teacher said, television's not good for you. Don't watch television and get out and do things. So it resonated with me, and I took that to heart. I was one of these people that never really watched television. And it got to the point where, like, when I was in college and grad school, people would talk about shows they had seen, and I'd say, what's that? And people would, like, their mouths would drop, like, or Tiger Woods, what's that? And people would be shocked. So so that so I developed this sort of arrogance, okay, that I felt like I was intellectually above everyone else, and I was actually kind of proud that I didn't know about all this mainstream media stuff. So then when I got a smartphone, um, and Facebook came along, I became terribly addicted to it, and it shocked me. I mean, just assumed, because I see them as being along a continuum, right? Television, and you're basically getting TV and other media through this phone. So I was shocked and distraught that I could not stop using this device. So after a number of years in 2014, I got rid of my smartphone and I went back to a flip phone, and I stayed off it for like 9 years. I went back to a smartphone 2 years ago, but I don't have data. So I only text and make calls, and it's a way to keep myself in check, right? So if I'm like out somewhere and I have to use the internet, I'll pull into like McDonald's and get on the Wi-Fi. So that's where my feeling that this was a serious problem came from. And then of course I saw it affect my kids. I mean, I saw two healthy kids in grade school suddenly are like staying in their bedrooms in July with the curtains drawn, FaceTiming with the kid across the street. So I was it it was just really becoming a big problem. So in 26, so at the time I had a market research business, and I still do some market research. And I just thought, I'm just gonna explore this. So I contacted two local YMCA camps because my kids had gone to them, and I knew they didn't allow phones. So I thought, I want to go in and do some research, and I want to talk to the kids, um, who have been there for overnight camp without access to their phones for 2 weeks. And the camps were really receptive to it. So I did something like 9 to 12 focus groups. I forget the number, but at both camps collectively. And then at one of the camps, they also gave the kids questionnaires to answer. And I was absolutely shocked at what I heard, because I thought I would be hearing that they were going crazy without their phones. Like, I can't take this. Can't wait to get back to my phone. And it was the complete opposite. It was the complete opposite. These kids were saying, like, I just feel so much better without my phone. I'm so much happier without my phone. I wish it could be this way when I get back home. But I know it's not. I know I'm going to slip back into using my phone all the time. It's such a relief to be away from social media. I heard this a lot, because people would say, well, you see those other people on the other side of the table here? If I had been allowed to bring my phone, I wouldn't know their names.
Hmm.
I would never have spoken to them, and I wouldn't know their names. But now I
Yeah.
feel like I know them better than my friends back home, my best friends back home. So they said they slept better without their phones. So you see my point. I realized, wow, I'm onto something, because the conventional wisdom at the time was that, well, they're not like adults. They're digital natives, and it's almost like people just assumed their nature was different in relation to technology. And what I was discovering was that that wasn't the case. You know, human nature had not changed. And when these kids were given an opportunity to experience something they had never experienced before, which is like 2 weeks without technology, it sort of awakened something within them, right? So I knew I was onto something, and I put together like a presentation. I applied to present at summer camp conferences where like summer camp owners go. And it just, one thing led to another. And I started doing more research on this. And then I partnered with people to do national surveys. Um, and I just kept doing research on it and getting more speaking engagements and presenting at conferences, different types of conferences. And eventually I expanded from kids, focusing on kids, to adults. So I started studying specifically the effect on the workplace, you
Hmm.
know, of tech addiction. And what I learned in that research shocked me too. So I don't know if you want me to keep going with this, but that's how I got into it. That's what led me into this.
Wow,
initial
it's
insights.
so interesting to think about the way that it impacts the so-called digital natives differently than the adults. I mean, I I know this is something older people struggle with, but I don't know whether to think younger people are going to have a better handle on it because they're around it all the time, or they're going to even be worse because,
But
I'm kind of
yeah,
like you in this regard that I remember my cousins were raised without a TV in the home. Their
well,
parents, I always thought this was so cool. Versus me, my family, my mom went back to work when I was probably kindergarten-ish age, and we spent summers just watching the TV. And when my parents were both working, we couldn't go out of the house, so the TV was our babysitter.
right.
We had HBO. We'd watch the same movies over and over. We'd watch Gilligan's Island reruns for hours, you know, just sitting in front of this thing. And I grew up looking across at my cousins and thinking that they were so lucky that they were getting this more natural childhood. They were running around playing, they were doing sports, they were going on interesting trips and field trips, and I was sitting in front of the TV. And so when my kids were little, and I have older children now, my daughters are grown, they're in their 20s. I I raised them without a TV too. We didn't have a TV in the home. As soon as I was an adult and I could make that choice for myself, there was no TV. And so I've kind of shunned that. And we
Well,
have one now, and it was a wrestling match between my husband and me over that, and he won. So we have a TV. But I am appalled when I see little kids on iPads in restaurants. When I see kids being handed phones to entertain them, I am absolutely appalled. I have 4 kids and we've never done anything like that. And they really can learn to entertain themselves and tolerate boredom and become creative. And so and I want to just read a couple of chats here, and then and then I want to get some of your thoughts on all of that and some further thoughts. But let's see, Danny 7190 says, "This is good timing. I started reading Paul Kingsnorth's book Against the Machine. I've not heard of that. Thank you for the title. Is it a good book? Do you recommend it?" Student of Rhythm says, "I remember when I saw the first color LCD screens 30 years ago. Even as recently as 20 years ago, most of my computer screen time was with a CRT monitor." And also, he also says, "My 11-year-old daughter," or she, I'm sorry, student, I think you're a guy. "My 11-year-old daughter is reading a novel called Unplugged about a spoiled rich boy who gets sent to a camp like that." That's
Oh,
very
wow.
cool.
Well,
That's cool. Paul McAuliffe, hi, how are you today? Helena says, "Truthfully, I can't even remember phone numbers now." Yeah, that's,
Oh,
that's,
well,
I don't know anybody's number. It's
yeah.
awful.
yeah, yeah. Hi, Ray and Area Hermit Woman. Hello, nice to see you today. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time to be across these generations interfacing with technology at different points in our lives.
Right, right. I think, the way I look at this, um, if you relate, so I came of age in the 80s, right? Back then it was acceptable to watch an hour and a half to 2 hours of TV a night. Like that was like recreational or relaxational, right? But we know kids are spending 6 to 8 hours a day on their phones, right? So that's why it's unhealthy, right? They're basically continuously online. Their minds are entangled or almost integrated with their phones mentally, right? Um, and it, it's when you think about after the second hour, that third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh hour, right? What's the return beyond, the first 2 hours of relaxation or recreation, right? What's the return? There's very little return, right? So, um, and that's what makes it so damaging, I feel, for young people because it's crowding out time doing other things. And that's what they're basically telling me in in my research, you know. I've had kids talk about, they decided not to do certain extracurricular activities because they didn't want to leave their phone,
Hmm.
you know.
Wow.
I had one question in a survey. I said, how often do you find yourself not doing something you actually want to do, you'd like to do, because you can't get away from your phone. And a third said it was like once a day.
Mm.
Every day. Imagine every, and then I asked for examples in an open-ended question. It was things like, I didn't go to the movies with my friends. I didn't go to dinner with my family. I stayed home on my phone. You know, I didn't practice the cello. I didn't do this or that, go to the beach or whatever. Right. So the, it's damaging them in that way. It's also damaging them because they're distracted, and everything that they do, because they're yoked to their phone, right? There's a certain amount of cognitive capacity that's being diverted to the phone that's not being channeled on that activity that they're performing, right? Schoolwork is an example, right? Or homework, right?
Mm.
And so that's hurting. I feel like th there's a lack of human development that's resulting from this. That
Mhm.
extra 5 hours a day, imagine if they could channel that the way we used to real world, 3D world activities, developing skills, accomplishments, right? Um, interests. Their lives would be so much richer. So it's almost, you can almost see that we're permitting them to diminish their lives in a way,
Mm.
you know?
I don't know if you
But
tested this or looked for it, but did you see increased rates of depression and anxiety, things like that, when you did some of those focus groups with those kids that had spent the 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 hours on the phones?
I I didn't necessarily specifically or precisely ask the question in that way, but there are indirect ways I got at,
Uh-huh.
call it anxiety, right? So I didn't ask about depression, but you know, uh, I'm trying to remember the percentage. Like, so I did a survey. I worked with the Jewish Community Center Association of North America because they run all these summer camps, right? So we surveyed, I think it was 1,300 kids who had attended Jewish summer camps that summer, and I'm trying to remember the number. It was 80 to 90% said they experienced much less anxiety because they didn't have access to social media, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's huge. That's huge. Um, kids talked in some of the other surveys I did in the focus groups, the relief of getting away from their phones at camp because they they don't experience the anxiety they experience when they're on social media all the time, right? So, and then I've asked about bullying, cyberbullying, gossip, and so that's a burden that they're relieved from. It's a lot of anxiety and emotional burden and worry, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things they say they're worried about is that they're going to be the one that's gossiped about. So when they see someone else being bullied or gossiped about, in the back of their minds, sort of at almost an unconscious level, they're fearing that they too. It's upsetting because they too could be a victim of that, and they don't want to be, right? But there's a lot of research that shows it's increased depression. Like, you might remember Mark Zuckerberg, right? Meta had done that research. I don't know, it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. They had done this research, internal research, and they found that I think it was affecting young teen girls negatively.
Mhm.
They had more depression, right?
Mhm.
Because they were spending all this time online and on social media. But Meta didn't care. They hid the research, and someone eventually leaked it, right? But
Yeah.
but yeah, we know there's other research. I think more academic researchers probably focus on measuring depression and things like that. But it's increasing depression among
Mm.
young people.
One of the things that I hear, when I work with families and kids, which I usually never wanted to work with kids. I really have qualms around therapy or coaching for young people, but I do work with some older teens. And I feel like a big part of what I'm seeing is this over reliance on tech for social connection with these kids.
Right,
And when I talk with parents about it, I'll usually hear, well, all of his friends are, that's how he communicates with all of his friends. If I were to take that away, the other kids are not going outside and doing things. So
right,
it just leaves a big gap in this kid's social experience. And I know my kids are, my younger kids are 12 and 14, and they don't have much access to to tech. I mean, it's pretty restricted around here. They don't have
Oh,
individual phones or anything like that. They do have a phone that has no browser on it that they can use when they go out for these long bike rides that they like to go on. And that was a decision I made because I wanted to be able to see them on GPS. When they're asking me, can we go on a 4-hour bike ride? I want to give them freedom and let them explore the world and have that uh, opportunity, but I also worry about not knowing where they are for 4 hours. So the GPS that was my sort of compromise. So
wow.
they have very limited access to independent screen time. And we moved to a neighborhood in June, and now we're in November, and we never see kids outside. We
Yeah,
just never see children out. They go on these long bike rides, and I hope that they'll meet somebody. Like maybe you'll meet another kid out there, in the neighborhood.
right.
We don't see them. Maybe you might catch a glimpse of a kid going to a car with their parents, but there are not children playing outside. And so when these parents say, I don't feel like I can take that away from my kid because that's how the kids communicate. They're all on a Discord together, or they're in some chat thing, or whatever it is. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And I also wonder for Jennifer and Christine, if you see that in your friends, family, clients, do you see these kind of issues, and how do you see people navigating that kind of lack of real life social activity for kids, social unstructured time? That's not, I mean, you can take them to a class, but it's just,
It seems like this weird combination to me where there's the unstructured time is time that is spent staring at a screen, whether if it's scrolling on their phone, on social media, or, texting or discording or whatever back and forth, or they're in a specifically assigned activity.
Right.
Okay, you're going to whatever dance class for an hour, which is nice, but I think that those unstructured periods of time where you're not on a screen and you're just playing and hopefully getting bored at some point because that's how you start to develop the creative impulse. That is what I see hugely lacking everywhere. And it's almost like people feel like they're not being a good parent if they don't have their kids scheduled. And so they just go from scheduled activity to homework to scrolling and screens.
Yeah, so I agree with you, and that's so first of all, your first point, Leslie, this feeling of being left out, or if I restrict my kids' tech use, they can't communicate. They're going to lose social connectivity, right? Because everyone's communicating digitally, right? So th that's an issue, and I've personally come to the conclusion that nothing's really going to change unless there's culture change. I feel that culture change, in other words, you have to have a critical mass of people who are conscious of the problem, who understand the dynamics of the problem, and who want to address it, right? For the ideas to go viral, so everyone changes the mentality. In other words, because this isn't there isn't a critical mass of people feeling the same way, then you're going to be the odd person out if you make that change. But if we had, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% of people who understood this problem and collectively decided to change, then we'd see some change. That change in culture can be, driven from the bottom up or the top down. Nobody at the top is trying to drive change. We don't have legislators who care about this issue. Um, we don't have political leaders. We don't have cultural leaders who really care about it. So I feel for the time being, unless individuals start talking to each other, right, in their small little communities or circles of friends, and we start to see, you know, these groups grow and expand, very little change is going to take place. That's how I feel. And
Mhm.
then to the point you were getting at, Jennifer, I recently added this new element to one of my talks, which is it, it's a way of sort of articulating what you were getting at, and that is the loss of introspection, right? So if And I have another talk I've developed that's how to conduct an effective digital detox, right? And I get at that issue. So I experience detoxes when I go camping, right? And it would be easy to overschedule yourself, right? So you're still externally focused, right? If you keep busy doing things, right? Well, I'm going to get off my screen, but I'm going to overschedule myself, so I'm always doing something. You're always going to be extroverted. You're always going to be looking outwardly, right? And it crowds out the time for introspection. So you talked about being bored. For me, when I go camping, it's at night, I'm sitting in front of a campfire and writing in a journal and thinking for 4 hours straight. And it's like this primordial memory comes back, like, oh, this is how it used to be, right? And what you start doing
Mm.
is taking all that freed up cognitive energy that used to go to your phone or being online, and you start introspecting, you start analyzing your relationships with your friends, with your kids, with your significant other,
Mhm.
right? You start thinking about your goals. And when this starts happening, it's like, wow, I haven't done this in so long. You awaken, But but I agree with you that that's what we're missing. We're not developing, our kids aren't getting time. You called it being bored, right? For introspection. And that's when all the creativity comes flooding back. So I talked
Right.
to an Olympic athlete named Chris Hoth. I heard him talk about this on a podcast a number of years ago. So I had a phone call with him to hear more. And he characterized it as all this creativity comes flooding back, right? For me, I think about it, I experience that, but also my mind just feels more powerful. I can feel this power come back. Like I can read faster and I absorb more of what I'm reading. I think at a deeper level. I think faster. I can write more clearly, and more effectively. Um, so I, I agree with you. I think, replacing this with scheduled activities that don't involve phones, that's good and it's better, but still it's not still not allowing for that time where you have nothing to do and you reflect, you know,
Yeah.
which,
Yeah.
which
I
makes
think a lot
makes
of
life richer.
good. I think a lot of good comes out of that time. And I feel like I was so privileged to have the kind of childhood where there wasn't tech yet and there weren't that many TV channels. And so you went outside and I spent so much time climbing trees and running around through the woods and then getting tired and so lying down outside in the grass reading a book or journaling or writing poetry or just daydreaming and staring at the clouds and that deep sense of beingness and peace I think is missing. And so I feel like feels like they constantly have to look outside themselves now for stimulation. The inner world seems to not be developing fully.
I agree. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And I've heard that in my some of my research. So I've done research with the kids, the teens at summer camps and also with college students. I've taken 2 camping trips with a group of college students where there's no tech access, and they talk about the same experience essentially. Like they talk about how they start reflecting inwardly and thinking about their problems and coming up with solutions that they wouldn't have come up with otherwise. Yeah, and it's in those moments where you lie down and you just stare at the clouds for 30 minutes, right? And then you read a
I think,
book.
and I think it just made us more creative. I mean, I have an older sister, and my parents didn't have a lot of money growing up, and they were always working and or whatever. So it's just her and I. We made a lot of friends in our neighborhood, but through those moments of boredom or kind of being alone, we came up with like different games that we would make up, and
Oh,
we'd create rules for them and store, and how stories for characters, and we'd play them out. We'd have these little plays. We'd make paper dolls and cut out little outfits for them. I mean, we just came up with different kinds of stories and different games, and we were very creative. And I used to love to just sit and write and perform and do all these kinds of things. And I really lost that growing up, to be honest, as I got older and kind of got a little bit more distant from that and started, well, we didn't have all that tech, but I do remember when we started getting AOL. That was, the big when AOL entered our home. And we started getting online at night and going into chat rooms and things. I was in high school, I think. I started disconnecting from that part of myself, I feel like, and getting more involved in being online. And so I lost a little bit of that. But as a kid, I was so creative and so smart. I read my journals later on and think, wow, where did this come from? But it was out of that boredom and not having a lot of money. So we weren't able to even buy fancy toys. We had to create all that stuff. And there was so much just insightfulness for being so young that we came up with, that I think it was such a disservice, I think, that we kind of lost that along the way. You don't see that with kids as much anymore. So I think that's something that I noticed, at least working with kids in my career, that I didn't see that creative spark that I believe all kids have. It just needs a way to kind of be stimulated, and the phones and the online deadens all those senses in a way.
Yeah.
Mhm. I want to read a couple more responses here in the chat. Morning Cigar says, I do think practicing a Sabbath from Friday evening to Sunday morning will help a lot of people. And so that I was going to ask you, Michael, what are some hacks or techniques or digital detox recommendations that you have? And then Paul McAuliffe says, good point about structured only time, Jennifer. Most kids don't experience simply effing off time in person with other kids, yet they're usually able to form them later in life. It's expressing skepticism about that. Student of Rhythm says, I want to see research into the relationship between time for introspection and sensitivity. Is there enough neuroplasticity for people to get more sensitive through downtime and introspection? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I think, Christine, I think that's so well put, what you said about that creativity. And I can remember as a kid being sent outside and not being allowed to come back. Like you just had to spend the day outside. I mean, we lived in a really small house. I think it was 900 square feet, and hot Texas summers, you just got kicked out for the day. It was like, go outside. That was the refrain from your parents, because all that kid energy in a little house is not okay. So they would just say, go outside. And you could come back in if you needed to grab a drink of water or a sandwich, go to the bathroom, but pretty much you were expected to spend your day outside. And so we got into all kinds of weird stuff, just whether it was throwing a ball, climbing a tree, riding your bikes around, going to somebody's house where you were actually allowed to be inside in the air conditioner. That was a thing too, but just all kinds of creative stuff that you just don't hear about kids doing anymore. So yeah, Michael, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you recommend people who are seeing this as a problem in their lives start to walk back from it? Because it's really hard. All these devices are engineered to keep your attention. So you're really swimming upstream when you try to pull back from them.
Well, it's very difficult. So, in terms of hacks, first of all, in the talks, I give talks to like different groups. So I've developed these talks for different types of groups, right? And I feel that going through a digital detox, if you can, for 5 days, whether it's on a vacation, if you do it for your kids, you can do it for your kids, or as a family or an individual, couple, whatever, going on a vacation where you do it. So for me, camping is an easy way to do it. Um, if you can experience a digital detox, it becomes a touchstone experience because it reminds you, if you're older like me, it reminds me of you of how it used to be, which like I said earlier, I found that that could be motivational for people because this is what happens. You migrate from this tech saturated mind state, you go through withdrawal, you kind of stabilize, say like on the second to third day, you still want to use your phone, but it's not driving you crazy like you're withdrawing from a drug, right? And then by the fifth day, you enter a new stage, which I call normalization. And in this stage, your mind is tech free. So you've gone from being tech saturated to tech free. You're liberated from this, and it feels so much better. And what you start to do is you start to reflect back upon naturally the state of mind you were just in 5 days ago, and you realize how unhealthy it is and how much it's robbing you. And you see how much better you feel in this new mind state. and it makes you want to continue to feel this way when you go back to your normal life, right? So I have found that to be motivating, and I've heard in my research with the teens and the college students that it's motivating. The college students that I went camping with, um, this is a college in Northern Ohio. They own a property up on Lake Superior. So they have all these programs where over the summer the students can go up there. So some of these students had, my point is that some of them had gone up there like 3 summers in a row. And they would say like the second or third summer of experiencing this, the repetition of it motivated them to change their behavior when they got back home. So that desire to to to, to free themselves when they get back home becomes so strong that they become motivated, and then they take action to change behavior. So what they really said was they got off social media. So there were several in this group that resigned from social media as a result of doing this. So I feel any digital detox experience has the potential to be transformational because it wakes you up.
Mhm.
Um, Now, obviously, not everyone can do a 5-day detox, right? So, in terms of quote hacks, the next challenge is how do you give yourself smaller detox experiences, right? So you can get sort of catch a glimpse of this, tech-free mind state. And there's no easy way to do it, So there are things that I do like don't don't get online for as long as possible in the morning because when you wake up in the morning, your mind is stable, right?
Mhm.
And you'll notice a difference if you jump right into it, right? Before breakfast, right? You you're gone. You're sort of transformed into that tech saturated mind state. If you can resist it for an hour, 2 hours or longer, you'll start to feel different, you
Mhm.
know. The other thing you can do is during the day, just decide I have to do this every day. And you can set a certain amount of time, 30 minutes, whatever. And I literally set a timer on my phone and I don't allow myself to get online. Um, Another thing I do is instead of defaulting, like when I have downtime, defaulting to getting online, I'll read a book. And I find that, if you're reading the printed page versus being online, you don't have all that distraction to draw you in. You're
Mhm.
you're more centered internally, right? And you're more in control. And it helps to stabilize your mind and it doesn't get you all the way to a detox state, but you start to move in that direction. So another thing to do, because some of these things are hard to do, is to enlist the help of other people. And that's another thing I hear in some of my research with adults and kids. There's a certain percentage of people who say, I wish someone would impose limits on me. In other words, I wish someone would rescue me, right? So I have about, in the surveys of teens, about 2/3, depending on how I ask the question, it's usually about 2/3 say, I wish I had the ability to control this. And then a smaller percentage say, I wish someone would impose limits on me. Right. So that's another way to try it. If you can get a spouse or significant other or someone else that you're tied to that you live with to help you limit this, right? Take your phone, or, whatever it is, but force a force on you some time, right? Without your phone.
Mhm.
That's another way to get these short hits. But the other point here, I've learned through my research with adults in the workplace that workplace culture can have an impact on how much time people spend using their phones at work. So, and I didn't directly ask that question, but it came out indirectly through open-ended questions. So people would write things like, well, that wasting time on phones at our workplace isn't a problem because we're professionals and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to be on our phones. Or we're mature adults, or we respect our boss and nobody would do that here. So that reveals that culture,
Mm.
right? And the environment and the norms that are established and accepted in a small group really can have an impact. If you're going to be punished, right, by feeling bad or made to feel less than if you're not living up to the standard, that can help. And I feel like you can abstract that point and apply it to any other group. It's not just the workplace, right? Um, so I do feel that if this can be, n- somehow normalized in small groups, like if you had one or two neighbors or friends in the area that were the same way that your kids hung out with. The parents could agree on this, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And we want to help our
And then
kids.
reinforce it for each other.
Right. But it's very difficult, right? See,
Yeah.
that's why in many ways I'm very skeptical that, I feel like we're on a precipice here for the next 15 years. It's either people are going to realize it's either I'm the old guy who's out of touch and can't accept change, right? Or I've recognized a real mental health issue, right? And if it's not addressed, we're going to have some problems in the future. That's how I look at it, right?
I
But I am
mean,
skeptical about that people are going to change,
I feel a bit skeptical too. And the reason I'll say this is because I think in a lot of work environments, especially places that I've worked at, you are expected to be reachable on your phone kind of 24/7. And you're expected to be reachable via text or via email, even on vacation, that you check your phone or that you check email. I know a lot of us various places that I've worked at, especially when I was working in mental health facilities, where I was a clinical supervisor, or I was a director, I needed to be available for emergencies. And there's this whole idea that somebody else will step in for you if you're gone. But at the end of the day, um, I was the one that was going to be responsible. And so there was an expectation that there was some reachability. So I think part of it too is that some of the corporate culture and some of the culture in other settings, even if it's nonprofit, there's a certain culture of expectation that you'll respond to emails and you'll respond to being available quickly and regularly. And I think that part would have to change quite a bit to see, kind of this bigger cultural shift in the work setting.
right? Could I mention some of my
Yes,
research on the workplace?
that'd
Because
be great.
you're right, and there's a complement to that. So I've done five or six surveys. I think I did five surveys of employees and one of managers, workplace managers. And across surveys, not I didn't
Mm.
ask in every survey, but across three or four surveys, I had two questions I would ask. And the first one was, how much time do you estimate you spend every day at work, using your phone for non-work purposes? And the average is 1.5 hours. So we have people estimating, right? I'm spending about an hour and a half on my phone for at work every day for doing things that have nothing to do with work. So then you probably know, like, people, if you ask them to report a negative behavior, they underreport it,
Right.
but they project it onto other people. So then I follow that up with, how much time do you estimate everyone else at work spends, right? And it jumps to 2.5 hours, right? So I average those two, 1.5 to 2.5, and I figure people are basically saying I'm spending 2 hours a day at work using my phone for personal reasons, and 78% said the biggest distraction was social media,
Mm.
right? So my point is, you're right, Christine. I mean, you're absolutely right that people need to be online for work and they have to have phone access. But the complement to that is there's a huge loss in productivity, right? So
Mhm.
in my survey, the first survey I did, I focused on productivity because that I figured that was the only issue. But then two additional issues emerged through the open-ended questions. One was conflict, and I found that basically people that the people that spend a lot of time on their phones at work and aren't doing their jobs, it creates conflict because other people get mad, right?
Mhm.
So bosses get mad and
Sure.
colleagues get mad. And I got examples like, because Joe can't get off of Facebook, we didn't hit our deadline and missed our bonus.
Mm.
Or I heard stories about people getting fired because they
Mhm.
couldn't get off their phones, you know. Um, but the other issue that emerged was safety. And I found, especially in industrial settings. So there were accidents in office settings, and it was things like people walking into a wall or falling down the stairs, things
Oh my
because they're on their
gosh.
phones, right? Or being hit by a cart. Someone's driving an electric cart in the office and they're on their phone and they get hit, things like that, right? But in industrial settings, I got examples like so and so was playing a game while he was operating a press and it crushed his arm, or someone was playing a game and they had finger severed,
Oh,
or
Wow.
a forklift driver was on his phone and then someone crossing his path was on their phone and he hit her and she ended up in the hospital for a week. Or someone was texting and driving and they drove off a cliff.
Yeah.
I mean, just crazy stuff. So my point is that it seems like there needs to be some kind of balance, right? And there is software that's been developed to address this, like but the employee has to accept that their employer is going to put the software on their phone, right? But
Mhm, mhm.
there is software that exists, like
To
is
block.
called what the one that I know well is called Truce. I've looked into it a lot,
Okay.
and it can block your phone
Okay.
use in certain time periods, like nine to five,
Yeah.
or it can block use geofencing. So if it's a construction site, it can turn your phone off when you enter the construction site. Or if you're in motion, like in a vehicle, it can turn your phone off. So, but I just want to say, like, there's a complement to what you're talking about, and so there's a complementary loss, right,
Yes.
to that benefit of being always connected, and it seems like they should be able to find some balance with mechanisms like this software, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
The thing
Yeah.
is, if we as adults struggle so much to control our own use of tech, how on earth can we be placing it in the hands of kids and teens and expecting them to control it? It just seems like we're literally handing them something that we know has addictive properties.
I
Right.
agree with you. Yeah, and that's something else I added to my most recent talk. I was basically saying, like, we're knowingly allowing this to happen, right? And it's it's unacceptable. And I let's put it this way, it's hard to get perspective on it, right? It's hard to get perspective on how much of a loss this is for young people because it's not like they're spending a solid 5 hour block staring at a screen, right? Unless they're playing games. We know kids can sit for 8 to 12 hours playing a game, right?
Oh
Like a
yeah.
video game, an immersive game. But this is all done sort of, most of it is intermittently while they're doing other things, right?
Hmm.
So I feel that's part of the problem. It's hard to get a real clear perspective on the damage that's being done. It's hard to see clearly that they're being damaged,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. I
But I agree with you. It's like it's almost, when you look at it from the perspective Jennifer just mentioned, it's almost unconscionable that we're allowing it, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, I know. And I want to ask you a little bit about phone bans in schools, but I think one of the things that is an impediment for parents to reduce their children's screen time is they'll say, "Well, I'm on it all the time too. I don't feel like I can say that." So there's kind of this core problem of how do I make rules for thee but not for me? And you see that in families where they know that if they were to take a stance on this, they'd really have to address their own digital addiction as well.
Right, right. Which is another reason I feel like unless someone drives culture change at a higher level, it's not going to be
Mhm.
addressed. Senator Josh Hawley back in 2019, he's the only one who's introduced any kind of bill to address this.
Hmm.
And it was called the SMART Act.
Hmm.
And it was going to require social media companies to limit every user to just 30 minutes a day.
You know
And
what I would love is if they'd all just go to color bars at 9 p.m., something like the old TV, like just why do we have to have
well,
24/7? Why can't
that's
we have
that's
color
right.
bars?
Right,
Um, I want
right.
to read a couple of these chats. Let me find where I was here. Ray 7707 says, I think that constant contact is also responsible for the mental exhaustion of people in this country, Christine. I think that's a really good point. And there's this way in which you're kind of filling up on this junk food version of human connection. And when you're full of junk food, you don't have any room to eat a nourishing meal. So you're not as interested in going out to dinner with somebody or having people over because you've been constantly connected to everybody in this really
Yes.
sort of superficial way.
Right.
Um, Student of Rhythm says there was a New Yorker cartoon years ago of a Jewish man on his cell phone saying, "If you need me, I'm here 24/6." I really like that a lot. JC Daedalus says, I see a few people online talking about AI today. I'm not sure if AI is something that you have spent a lot of time looking at and thinking about, Michael, but if you are interested in talking about that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I'm also interested in your thoughts on phone bans in school and whatever else
Right.
is coming up.
Well, I actually have a talk that I developed years ago, and it was called How to Create a Digital Wellness School Culture. And it's based upon schools having phone bans. And I think right now there are like 22 states. Like this year alone, 6 or 7 states, including my state, Ohio, um, impose statewide phone bans at schools, right? And from my perspective, it's a daily digital detox. It's 6 to 8 hours a day without phone access, right? So they go through that same withdrawal period. Now they revert back to their habits when they go back home, right? But it takes about 2 to 3 weeks. After about 2 to 3 weeks, they get accustomed to and accept. It becomes normalized that when I'm at school for these hours, I'm not going to have access to my phone, and it's okay. I don't feel the anxiety. It becomes normal. And I feel that schools can exploit that. That can be that experience can be a foundation upon which they instruct students. They give them, and think about it this way: they have 12 years to do this. It's not like they have to do it in 1 year, right? The repetition across years could be really beneficial, but they can give them an intellectual framework for understanding the problem and language to use to name the problem. They can challenge them to, a big opportunity is to get students to think about, how do I transfer this experience of not using tech at school to other environments like home or being with my friends, right? So they can start to sort of get the kids to think for themselves what they might do and how it might affect them and benefit them to reduce screen time, and they could start to work together, right? They could also help them. They could challenge them to try those things and come back and reflect. This weekend, everybody in health class or whatever, this weekend, everyone was going to try to get off their phones, how to go and talk about it, right? And then they can get them to project into the future, like after you leave school, how can you continue to do this in certain environments, right? So I feel that the school bans could be tremendously beneficial if you don't look at it just as a restriction or a rule, right? But you've probably heard some of the problems. I just heard about one recently, in a certain school system. They it's in a state where they're banning phones for the first time, but they're allowing the kids to access all this stuff on their laptops at school. So it negates the whole, it's not the device, it's about the technology and the content, right?
Mhm.
So it, the other problem I found in my research is enforcement can be an issue.
Mm.
So schools, it's often the case that a school has a phone ban on the books, but they don't enforce it. Like if teachers are inconsistent in 40% of the teachers don't enforce it, you've got a problem.
Mhm.
It creates a lot of tension and conflict between teachers, and then kids. If a kid has two teachers that allow them to use their phones, they feel like they should be able to, despite the fact that the rule exists.
I don't
So
see
the
how it's not universal to ban phones. I just don't understand. Like we weren't allowed. You got caught passing notes. Do you remember doing notes and all the cute ways we would fold them and give them to our
Yeah.
friends? And that wasn't allowed. I mean, the teachers weren't always real jerks about it, but it wasn't
Right,
allowed because
Right.
you're here to focus on your schoolwork, not write notes to your friends. And these, if the majority of the time being spent on these things is on social media, that's somewhere between writing a note and playing a video game. It's just something, it's so unprofessional for people to use this stuff during work and to allow students to use this during school. It just seems like such a
right.
no-brainer.
The analogy I use in my talks, I try to make it humorous, but it would be like when I was a kid, right, in the 80s, if bringing a small TV into school and plugging it in, like in class, I've got 10 minutes at the end of class, I'm done with my test. I mean, it would be totally outrageous, right? To
Hmm.
plug a TV in and watch TV, but that's
Yeah.
what kids are doing. They're watching YouTube. Well, they have earbuds in, but so what, you
Hmm.
know?
Hmm.
So I agree with you. It's a lot of this has been normalized, so it's just accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Let's see. JC Daedalus says, recently my son got suspended for saying an online meme out loud, not thinking much of it, but because it sounded like a terror threat, we got hit with a serious warning. Wow, crazy.
So,
Wow. Yeah, he says he's back at school now, but I took away his access to internet and his laptop now, possibly indefinitely. Oh, how old is he, JC? That's interesting. I just don't understand how this that when I was in undergrad, this was when I guess this would have been I graduated in 2008. So the aughts. We had people bringing laptops in. The school assigned you a laptop or sold you one basically for probably way over market price. And so a lot of people would bring laptops in for the ostensible purpose of note taking during class. I didn't bring it. I just used a notepad and paper. And if I would sit in the back of the class or farther back, I could see Facebook on everybody's screens. And back then, MySpace, you just saw everybody's goofing around.
Right.
And it felt tremendously disrespectful to the professors and to basically everybody else. It was just, and it really seems, again, to use the same phrase, like a no-brainer. Why are we doing this? This is actually one of the reasons. There are many, but one of the reasons I homeschool instead of putting my kids in school is I think that the exposure to this technology is not, it's far more time wasting than it is enriching.
Right.
And you can learn just fine listening to a lecture, reading a book, and taking notes by hand. You do not need this everything box, this distracto vision screen with you 24/7 in order to learn.
Right. Right.
Okay, JC says he's
They,
14, middle school.
they did it in grad school too. Leslie, I would peek over sometimes casually, see the students' screens up, and they'd have Facebook up or whatever and be, instant messaging off of their, off the iMessage on, Mac computers and things. And,
Oh,
graduate students are doing it.
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Student of Rhythm says, why are they doing it, Leslie? Because administrators are suckers for anything people can sell them as preparing our young generation for the future. Yeah, my daughters went to a school when we were in San Antonio. They went to a pretty good school that people really were very impressed by, a good district. Kind of if you know San Antonio, it was the Alamo Heights School District, and we lived in sort of Terrell Heights, which is outside of that, this kind of poorer area that goes to school in the wealthier district. And this school district was so proud of how much funding they were able to provide per student. But we'd moved from a poorer district to this district, and really what I saw the major difference in what they provided kids was computers. The poorer district, there was more face-to-face time with your teachers, and in the richer district, there was a lot of time with screens. And I just thought it was a really strange sort of, I don't know, virtue signal or wealth signal, conspicuous consumption kind of marker for this rich school district.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, JC Daedalus says, what would you guys recommend for kids who are addicted to online memes and speaking with AI bot chats? Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
Addicted to speaking to
To
chatbots?
AI, like Chat GPT and stuff, and
I
maybe
don't
even
know.
worse, maybe those companions.
Yeah. I I do have a talk that I just developed and gave for the first time a couple weeks ago on ChatGPT, but it's really about how to really how to effectively use it to teach yourself things, to be an autodidact. So I haven't gotten into any other issues with AI yet, you
I
know.
did notice that in your when you and I were emailing, you're very skeptical about a lot of this screen stuff, but it seems like you do see some value in the AI.
I personally, I see tremendous value for education.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
I've been able to teach myself things. I just can't believe how effective it is. And if you learn how to use it effectively, if you learn how the chatbots and the large language models work, um, you can be even more effective. Basically, you want to give it enough information quickly so it achieves what I have called cognitive alignment. or cognitive mirroring. So it eventually, if you're working on a project with it, and you stay focused on that project in a long conversation, or you use the projects feature, um, it will align with you intellectually, and it aligns with your goals, and it becomes exponentially more effective. But the other thing is it can teach you things in um, at a level at which you want to be taught. So the cliche is to say, talk to me like I'm a third grader. Well, all you have to do is iteratively ask questions of refining questions, right? And it's incredibly helpful. It really is.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
to me, it was transformational in terms of self-learning,
Mm.
Wow.
Well, I like the nuance in your take on this, that you're looking at it. You're not just a knee-jerk Luddite like some of us, me
Well,
included.
well, the other thing I found, initially, this is another big issue. I think maybe one of those people in the comments was getting at the anthropomorphization of these things, because it
Mhm.
does feel like it's a human. I spent probably 20 hours studying large language models to understand how they work. Once you really understand it, it demystifies it. And I felt like it knew me. Then I realized it's just a machine, So
Mhm.
if you and it shatters that anthropomorphization, the tendency to anthropomorphize. It's just a machine.
Hmm.
It takes
I
away that risk.
I know we're at time, but I want to read one more chat real quick. Thank you so much for the super chat, JC. He says, my son found chatting with AI companion bots, not tool bots. That's the other reason I took away his computer. Any suggestions or thoughts? Maybe Mike's optimistic point about being an autodidact.
All I can say, I mean, that sounds like a serious problem, especially if they're encouraging kids to do this kind of
Right.
thing, right? I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like it's another thing we have to be
Right.
monitoring and worried about. I mean, I would be concerned about that, yeah. Because they
Yeah.
could, even if they use it to learn things, right?
Mhm.
There's if they're still going to be using it as a human companion, a replacement for a human companion, that's obviously going to be a problem.
I know he's 14, I think you said, JC, and somebody else made a comment about how when you try to restrict these things for a teenager, they really put up quite a fight, especially if they've become accustomed to it, just as you would
Mm.
expect. And I would just say it's never going to get easier than right now. If you think you need to restrict this, it's not going to get easier as he gets older. This would be the time to put some limits on this if you're concerned about it. It's not easy ever, but it doesn't get easier over time.
Yeah,
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is such an important topic, and I feel like there's still so much more to explore and say. I'd love to have you back with us in a few weeks if you are up for it, because I
sure. And
know
like,
there's a whole like second section of the talk that we could get into.
right. Well, yeah, I really do appreciate the opportunity too. It was real pleasure to join you guys. So.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all in the chat for joining us today as well. Hope everybody has a wonderful week. And